The buffalo came like thunder, made flesh, 10,000 hooves, hammering the Kansas earth as they stampeded across the ridge. The overland stagecoach crested the hill directly into their path. Metal screamed against stone. Wood splintered like gunshots. Bodies flew through rain-lashed air as the coach tumbled down the embankment, crushed beneath the weight of its own momentum. Silence. Evelyn Caraway clawed her way to consciousness through a symphony of agony. Rain hammered her face, washing blood from a gash on her forehead into her mouth. The coach lay shattered around her, one wheel spinning lazily in the storm. Her left ankle screamed where twisted iron had pinned it, the same iron that had saved her life by inches. The driver's neck bent wrong. The judge's clerk lay crushed beneath the strongbox. Blood pooled in mud, mixing with rain and shattered dreams. Only Jeremiah still breathed. The freedman who'd ridden shotgun was dying, blood frothing from his lips as he whispered prayers. His dark eyes found hers through the wreckage. "Miss Evelyn," he gasped, "promise me. You gotta live. Promise." She tried to speak, but only a croak emerged. Her emerald engagement ring, Judge Amos Hollis's claim of ownership, caught lightning's flash. "Promise," Jeremiah whispered again, then his breathing rattled to nothing. "I promise," she whispered to the storm. Hours crawled past, like dying things. Rain stopped. Sun came up cruel and bright, bringing buzzards that circled with patient hunger. Evelyn drifted through fever dreams, where her gambling father bet her life away, where Judge Hollis's cold hands promised protection she'd never wanted. She woke to shadow falling across her face. A man crouched beside the wreckage, tall-weathered, carrying the sharp angles of the Lakota in half his face, while Scottish bones showed beneath copper skin. Dark hair hung loose past his shoulders, and his eyes held the wariness of something hunted. John Two Birds had been tracking the buffalo herd when he'd heard the stampede shift course. Following buzzards to wreckage was grim work, but it paid. He hadn't expected to find life clinging to twisted metal. "Please," she whispered, voice raw as scraped hide, "don't leave me here." John knew the smart play. His father had died helping a white woman 20 years back, lynched by a mob who decided mercy was assault. But this woman would die without help. He began digging her free. Working in silence, he moved chunks of wood and twisted metal with careful precision. When he lifted the wheel, Evelyn screamed and passed out. John bound her ankle with strips torn from her petticoat, fashioned a travois from broken timber, then loaded her onto it. 3 miles from the crash site, hidden where buffalo grass grew thick, John had built a dugout shelter invisible from 20 yards. He settled Evelyn on robes, cleaned her wounds with whiskey, and set her ankle. Her fever climbed through the night. At dawn he heard riders. Distant but closing, men with purpose. He woke Evelyn with water dripped on her lips. Her eyes snapped open, wild with panic. Something sharp drove into his shoulder, a hairpin she'd kept hidden. John jerked back, blood running down his arm, watching her crawl away like a wounded animal. She made it 20 feet before collapsing, sobbing with exhaustion. John followed slowly, speaking low. Lakota words his mother had used to calm frightened horses. When she finally stopped fighting, he carried her back and tended her wounds without reproach. Over the following days, survival demanded trust. John would disappear before dawn, returning with water game medicine roots. Evelyn would lie still and heal fighting fever and nightmares. They barely spoke, but slowly, necessity bred cooperation. When infection threatened her ankle, John showed her how to boil willow bark. When night sweats nearly killed her, he demonstrated heat regulation with buffalo fur. When she woke screaming, John would sit nearby until terror passed. The first time Evelyn tried to walk, she fell hard, weeping with frustration. John carved her a crutch from ash wood without judgment. "Thank you," she said when she managed 3 steps, the first words she directed at him. John nodded and went back to mending her dress. The flash flood came without warning on a clear night. John woke to water rushing through the entrance, and Evelyn's scream as currents swept her toward the door. He caught her as she went past, hauling her back, while debris hammered their shelter. They spent the night pressed together, sharing warmth, while the land tried to drown them. When morning came, their shelter was half destroyed, but they were alive. For the first time since the crash, Evelyn looked at John without fear. "I misjudged you," she said. "I'm sorry." John studied her face, then spoke his first English words to her. "You had reason." As days shortened, she began telling him pieces of her story. The gambling father who'd seen her as currency, the mother who'd chosen abandonment, the judge who'd offered protection that felt like imprisonment. "I tried to run once," she admitted over rabbit stew. "Made it 3 miles before I realized I had nowhere to go. Walked back and accepted his proposal that same day." "Sometimes the cage has invisible bars," John said. "What's your cage?" John was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Being my father's son." One morning, Evelyn insisted on returning to the crash site. She'd grown stronger, able to walk with her crutch, and the need to bury the dead gnawed at her conscience. "The men have been searching," John warned. "I've seen their tracks." "Then we go at dawn." Steel rang in her voice. Those people deserve better. They rode to the crash site in grim silence. Working together, they dug graves in hard earth marked with careful stone patterns. Evelyn saved Jeremiah for last, shrouding him with scraps from her dress, whispering gratitude for his dying words that had become her purpose. While collecting scattered possessions, she found a blood-stained badge half buried under twisted metal. U.S. Deputy Marshal Wade Cutter. "Judge Hollis's man," she whispered. "If he survived." John studied the dried blood. "This is fresh, maybe 3 days old." They rode back, understanding what this meant. Wade Cutter was alive hunting. Judge Hollis would want his investment back. That night, John finally told her about his father. William Two Birds had saved a white woman from drowning. The mob that lynched him claimed he'd assaulted her. The woman, Sarah Mitchell, had stood silent while they strung him up. "I was 12, John said, staring into flames. "Hiding in grass, watching them hang him. He saw me at the end, shook his head, kept me hidden. Last thing he did was save my life." "I'm sorry," Evelyn whispered. "I swore I'd never risk myself for white folks again. But sometimes keeping that promise feels like dying every day. Thank you for breaking it. For me." The next morning brought horses, multiple riders moving with purpose. Through gaps in their concealment, they watched 6 men search in expanding spirals. Professional hunters armed and dangerous. The leader was massive with graying hair and cold eyes. Virgil Brant John knew the name from trading post whispers. Brant led men who took whatever they wanted from whoever couldn't stop them. One rider found something fabric from Evelyn's petticoat caught on thorns. Brant examined it, then smiled like a wolf. "The judge's bride," he announced. "Worth more alive than dead boys." As they closed in, another voice cut through morning air, cultured, educated, cold as winter wind. "Gentlemen, I believe you found something belonging to me." Wade Cutter rode into view, flanked by 2 hard-faced men. Judge Hollis's deputy marshal wore authority like armor badge gleaming despite bloodstains. His left arm hung in a sling face, bearing bruises of someone who'd barely survived the coach crash. "Now, Cutter," Brant drawled, not lowering his rifle. "Finders keepers. The lady is betrothed to Judge Hollis. Any harm that comes to her will be answered in blood. Judge ain't here, might be dead." Cutter's smile was blade-thin. "Judge Hollis is very much alive. He remained in Kansas City and sent me to collect his bride. I suggest cooperation rather than conflict." What followed made Evelyn's blood freeze. These men were dividing her like butchered meat, arguing percentages. None considered she might have opinions. "Of course there's the Indian," Brant mentioned casually. "Been hiding her, probably having his fun. Worth good money, Army pays bounties for hostile breeds." "John Two Birds isn't reservation," Cutter said. He's a half-breed trapper. But you're right about bounties. Captain Eddings at Fort Hays has standing orders. Captain Marcus Eddings, known throughout Kansas territory as a man who believed the only good Indian was a dead one. Before John could stop her, Evelyn crawled through their escape tunnel and emerged from hidden grass, using her crutch to stand despite injuries. "I'm here," she called, voice carrying across the land. "Evelyn Caraway, and I'm not going anywhere with any of you." Shocked silence. Then Brant laughed. "Well, hell, merchandise can walk after all." John emerged with his rifle trained on Brant's chest. The standoff stretched tight as a bowstring. "Let her go," John said quietly. "She's been through enough." "Can't do that, Breed. Too much invested now." Cutter studied John with professional interest. Mighty charitable pulling her from that wreck. It was right. You know what's right, two birds knowing your place. Not interfering with white folks' business. This woman's business became mine when I chose to save her life. The moment stretched impossibly thin. 8 armed men in a circle each, waiting for someone else to move first. Evelyn stood in the center like the eye of a storm. "You want to know what's right," she said, voice carrying clearly. "I choose my own fate. I'm not Judge Hollis's property. I'm nobody's property." She pulled out her emerald engagement ring and placed it on the ground. With deliberate ceremony, she brought her crutch down hard, crushing the expensive bauble into glittering fragments. "There's your bounty. Take it and go." Brant's face darkened. "You think breaking some trinket changes anything? You're still worth money, ring or no ring." He started toward her, rifle lowered but ready. John shifted, aim finger tightening. In another second, the morning would explode. Thunder split the air, not gunfire, but hoofbeats. A cavalry patrol crested the ridge, blue uniforms bright in morning sun. At their head rode Captain Marcus Eddings himself, pale eyes taking in the scene with military precision. "Gentlemen," Eddings called as his troop deployed. "Seems we have a situation." Cutter stepped forward. "Captain Eddings, Deputy Marshal Wade Cutter, acting on Judge Hollis's authority. We're here to recover stolen property." "Property?" Eddings' gaze settled on Evelyn. "The lady is Judge Hollis's betrothed. She was in a stagecoach accident and has been recuperating under this half-breed's care. We're returning her to her rightful guardian." Eddings studied John like livestock. John, two birds, living off reservation without proper papers. Federal offense. "I'm not subject to reservation law," John replied steadily. "My mother was Lakota, but I was born free territory. My father served as Army Scout. Your father was a breed who got above himself. Ended up decorating a tree. You do well to remember his example." The casual cruelty hit John like a physical blow, but he forced himself still. Violence now would only prove their point. Evelyn stepped forward, balancing on her crutch. "Captain, I need to make something clear. I am not Judge Hollis's property, and I do not wish to return to Kansas City. Mr. Two Birds saved my life and has treated me with nothing but respect." Eddings' smile was winter ice. "Miss, you've clearly been traumatized. It's not uncommon for victims to form attachments to their captors. Rescue sentiment. You'll feel differently in civilization. This man is my protector, not my captor." "From what exactly?" Evelyn gestured at Brant's men. "From those who would buy and sell me like cattle. A breed's got her thinking she's some princess." Brant spat. "Week in a proper house will cure that." "Enough," Eddings snapped. "Two Birds, you're under arrest for kidnapping, interfering with federal marshals, and violation of territorial residency laws." "What trial? You've already decided I'm guilty." "Guilty of being born Indian in white man's country. That's crime enough." As soldiers moved to arrest him, Evelyn threw herself between John and the rifle's arms, spread wide despite her injuries. "No. If you want him, you go through me." Eddings stared in disbelief. "Step aside or be arrested as accomplice. Then arrest me. I won't move." A dozen rifles trained on 2 people who refused to yield. The standoff stretched impossibly tense. It was Wade Cutter who broke the deadlock. "Captain," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something about Judge Hollis." Eddings turned. "Speak." Cutter's face had gone pale. "The judge. He didn't send me to rescue Miss Carraway. He sent me to make sure she never reached Dodge City alive." The words fell like stones into still water. Evelyn stared at Cutter in horror. "What?" "The marriage contract was a sham." Cutter continued, voice gaining strength. "Judge Hollis already has a wife in St. Louis. He was using you to cover his tracks on unsavory business dealings. When those deals went bad, you became a liability. The stagecoach crash was supposed to be your funeral." Brant laughed harshly. "Well, I'll be damned. Our judge ain't quite the pillar he pretends. I was supposed to make sure you didn't survive the journey." Cutter said to Evelyn, "When the stampede hit, I thought my job was done. Finding you alive, it changed things." "Changed how?" Eddings demanded. "I've done bad things in the judge's service. Buried evidence, intimidated witnesses, looked away when decent folks got hurt. But I never killed an innocent woman. And I sure as hell never watched a good man hang for showing mercy." He pulled his badge from his vest and dropped it beside the crushed ring fragments. "John Two Birds isn't the criminal here, Captain. We are." Silence stretched like a held breath. Wind whispered through grass, carrying the scent of coming winter. Eddings's face had turned leather-colored. "Deputy Cutter, are you confessing to conspiracy and attempted murder?" "I am." "And you expect me to believe this half-breed is innocent? I expect you to do what's right for once in your goddamn life." The captain's hand dropped to his sidearm, but before he could draw, the morning exploded. Brant had been watching with growing frustration, seeing his payday slip away. If the law wouldn't take the woman, he would. He lunged forward, grabbing Evelyn's arm and hauling her against his chest knife, appearing at her throat. "Enough talking," he snarled. "Woman's coming with me." His men raised rifles, covering the soldiers. John started forward, but stopped as the blade pressed deeper. "Let her go, Brant," John said quietly. "Go to hell, Breed. You cost me time and money." The knife began drawing blood. Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling steel bite into her skin. After everything, the crash, the fever, the healing, the brief hope it would end like this. But what happened next shocked everyone. A rifle shot cracked across the grassland. Brant staggered backward, releasing Evelyn as he clawed at the spreading red stain on his chest. The shot had come not from John or the soldiers, but from Wade Cutter's smoking pistol in his hand. "Some things are worth more than money," Cutter said as Brant collapsed. Chaos erupted. Brant's men opened fire on the soldiers, who returned disciplined volleys. Horses reared and screamed. Men shouted and died. When smoke cleared 30 seconds later, 4 of Brant's men lay dead. The 5th, a young kid, sat holding his shattered arm and sobbing. Brant himself was barely alive, blood frothing from his lips as he glared at John with dying hatred. "Should have minded your own business, Breed," he wheezed. "Should have left her alone," John replied. Brant tried to laugh, but only blood came out. He died staring at empty sky. Captain Eddings surveyed the carnage with professional detachment. 3 soldiers wounded but alive. Immediate threat neutralized. But problems remained. "Well," he said, reloading with deliberate precision, "that settles Brant's enterprise. But we still have a wanted half-breed and runaway bride." But his sergeant, a grizzled veteran named Walsh, stepped forward. "Sir, perhaps we should consider Deputy Cutter's testimony. If Judge Hollis is as corrupt as claimed." "Sergeant Walsh, you're out of line." "Yes, sir. But I'm also right. The men are talking, Captain, saying maybe it's time for new leadership. Someone who follows actual orders instead of making up rules. Mutiny, politely dressed, but unmistakable." Eddings looked around at his soldiers and saw truth in their faces. His reign of terror was over. "This isn't finished," he snarled at John. Yes, it is, John replied calmly. Been finished for 20 years. You just never got the message. Eddings wheeled his horse and spurred toward Fort Hayes, leaving his men to follow or not. Most stayed behind to tend wounded and bury dead. Sergeant Walsh approached John cautiously. Mr. Two-Birds, I can't speak for territorial authorities. But for what it's worth, you did right today. John nodded. Thank you, Sergeant. Don't thank me yet. Eddings still has friends in high places. You and the lady might want to consider relocating somewhere healthier. Good advice. John looked at Evelyn, who was leaning on her crutch, but standing straight despite everything she'd endured. What do you want to do? He asked. Evelyn considered seriously. Judge Hollis was still alive, still dangerous. Eddings would return with reinforcements. Kansas territory held nothing but pain for both of them. But for the first time in her life, she had real choice. Choice bought with blood and courage and the kindness of a man who'd risked everything to save a stranger. I want to go west, she said. Somewhere new, somewhere we can start over. John felt something ease in his chest, tension he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. West is a big place. Then we'll have room to breathe. As they prepared to leave Kansas territory forever, Wade Cutter approached them. The former deputy marshal looked older than his years, worn down by guilt and hard choices. Miss Carraway, he said formally, I want you to know I'll be testifying against Judge Hollis when this comes to trial. You won't have to worry about him anymore. Thank you, Mr. Cutter. That means more than you know. Cutter turned to John. Two-Birds, I owe you an apology. I spent years enforcing unjust laws, serving unworthy men. You showed me what real honor looks like. John studied the man's face, seeing genuine remorse. We all do what we think we have to. The trick is learning when to stop. I learned today. Maybe too late, but I learned. They shook hands, white man and Indian former enemies, finding common ground in the wreckage of their old lives. 6 months later, they'd settled in a hidden valley in Colorado Territory, where air was thin and clean and law was whatever decent people made it. John raised horses while Evelyn grew vegetables in stubborn soil. They built a cabin with their own hands, learned to live with mountain silence, and slowly began trusting that peace might be possible. But the past wasn't finished with them. The rider came up their valley one morning when fresh snow dusted the peaks. Young, maybe 25, with soft hands and expensive clothes. His horse was lathered with sweat, and his eyes held the desperate look of hunted prey. Now, ma'am, he called to Evelyn, who was feeding chickens. I'm looking for Evelyn Carraway. Been told she lives hereabouts. John emerged from the stable, studying their visitor with careful attention. Something about the young man's manner set off warning bells, too eager, too nervous. I'm Evelyn Carraway, she said carefully. What do you want? The stranger dismounted with evident relief. Name's Thomas Carraway. I'm your brother. Evelyn dropped the scattered grain face, going pale. John moved closer, positioning himself between her and the stranger. Tommy, she whispered, is it really you? She stepped around John, studying the young man's face. Yes, there were familiar features. Their father's stubborn chin, their mother's green eyes. But he was softer than she remembered, unmarked by hardships that had carved lines around her own eyes. Hello, Evelyn. Thomas's smile was strained. I can't believe I found you. When they said you died in Kansas, Who said I died? John interrupted. Thomas glanced at him nervously. Judge Hollis. He came to St. Louis after the accident, said you'd been killed in the crash. But something about his story didn't sit right. I hired detectives, followed rumors, tracked down survivors. Eventually, I found Wade Cutter in a Denver jail. That name sent ice through their hearts. What did Cutter tell you? Evelyn asked. The truth. About the judge, about the arrangement, about what really happened. Thomas's voice carried an edge now, something harder than grief. He also told me about the reward. What reward? John asked, though he was beginning to suspect. Thomas's smile changed, becoming something colder. Judge Hollis is offering $10,000 for information leading to your recovery, Evelyn. Dead or alive, though he'd prefer alive. Seems you know things about his business that could prove inconvenient. Evelyn felt the world tilt. You're going to turn me in. Your own brother. Half-brother. Thomas corrected. And father lost everything because of you. Died in debtor's prison because of your selfish refusal to honor obligations. Mother's living in a boarding house, taking in washing. All because you ran away from responsibilities. My responsibilities? Evelyn's voice rose. I was sold Tommy. Traded like livestock to pay gambling debts. That wasn't responsibility, that was slavery. That was sacrifice for the family's good. Something you never understood. John studied the young man's positioning, noting how he'd placed himself between them and the house, cutting off escape routes. This wasn't coincidence or reunion. This was carefully planned ambush. How many men did you bring? John asked quietly. Thomas's smile widened. Enough. On cue, 4 riders emerged from concealment behind their barn. Professional gunmen armed and ready. They'd been waiting since before dawn. But John Two Birds had survived 30 years on the frontier by never trusting coincidence. The moment Thomas mentioned Judge Hollis, John had known this day would end in blood. He'd been preparing, even as they talked. The rifle was hidden in the woodpile, loaded and ready. His horse was saddled in the stable. Emergency supplies were cached in 3 locations around their property. $10,000 is considerable money. John said conversationally, edging toward the woodpile. More than I've ever seen, Thomas agreed. More than enough to set Mother up properly, pay off Father's remaining debts. And all you have to do is betray your sister. All I have to do is return stolen property to its rightful owner. The words hit Evelyn like physical blows. This boy, this stranger, wearing her brother's face, truly believed she belonged to Judge Hollis. Believed her marriage contract was more binding than blood. Oh, Thomas, she said desperately. You don't understand what kind of man Hollis is. What he wanted to do to me. I understand he paid good money for a wife, and you ran off with an Indian instead of honoring your agreement. He tried to have me killed. So you say. But you're here, aren't you, safe and sound and living in sin with a half-breed savage? The casual venom in those last words sealed Thomas's fate. But before John could reach the rifle, Evelyn stepped forward. You want me to go back? She asked her brother. You want me to honor my obligations? It's what Father would have wanted. Father is dead, Tommy. Dead because he chose cards over family, gambling over responsibility. I won't make his mistakes. She walked toward Thomas with her familiar, uneven gait, her limp more pronounced when emotional. Morning sun caught silver threading through her dark hair, premature gray earned through hardship. But I'll make you a deal, she continued. I'll go with you willingly. No fight, no fuss, on one condition. Thomas frowned suspiciously. What condition? You let John go free. No bounty hunting, no pursuit. He saved my life when your precious judge left me to die. Whatever happens to me, he doesn't deserve to suffer for showing mercy. Evelyn, no, John said urgently. Don't do this. She didn't look back. It's my choice, John, my decision. Thomas considered the offer, greed warring with caution. $10,000 was $10,000 willing or kicking. And eliminating the Indian would remove complications. All right, he said finally. The breed can go. But you come with us now, no tricks. No tricks, Evelyn agreed. She turned to face John, and he saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. She was saying goodbye, not just for now, but forever. She'd made her choice and was prepared to die with it. Thank you, she said softly, the same words she'd spoken that first night in the dugout. For everything. John understood then what she was really doing. Thomas and his hired guns expected him to run to abandon her and save himself. They were counting on the stereotype of the faithless savage who'd use a white woman and discard her when trouble came. They had no idea what they were dealing with. John Two Birds had spent his entire adult life running from his father's shadow, afraid that caring would bring death. But Evelyn had taught him something more valuable than survival, that some things were worth dying for. As she limped toward her brother, John made his own choice. The rifle came up smooth and fast. His first shot took the gunman on the left before the man could clear leather. His second shot shattered Thomas's gun hand, sending the young man stumbling backward with a scream of pain and surprise. The remaining 3 gunmen opened fire, filling morning air with thunder and smoke. But John was already moving, rolling behind the woodpile as bullets chewed splinters from logs. Evelyn dove for the house, her damaged ankle giving way and sending her sprawling in dirt. But as the gunfight raged, something impossible happened. A voice called out from the tree line, familiar, strong, very much alive. "Drop your weapons now." Jeremiah stepped into view, no longer the dying freedman from the stagecoach wreck. He was older, grayer, bearing the scars of near death, but undeniably alive. In his hands was a shotgun, and behind him came 2 more men, freed slaves who'd been tracking Thomas's group for days. "Jeremiah," Evelyn whispered in disbelief. "Hello, Miss Evelyn. Told you I'd see you again." The gunfight ended as quickly as it had begun. Thomas's remaining men, caught between John's rifle and Jeremiah's shotgun, threw down their weapons. Thomas himself cowered behind his fallen horse, clutching his mangled hand and sobbing. How was all Evelyn managed? "Crawled away from that wreck same as you," Jeremiah said with a smile. "Took me weeks to heal up, longer to track where you'd gone. Been following your trail ever since, making sure you stayed safe. When I heard about bounty hunters asking questions in Colorado, figured it was time to step in. You've been watching over us. Promised myself I would after what you did at the crash site. Way you honored me, buried me proper when you thought I was dead. Least I could do was return the favor." John lowered his rifle, still trying to process what he was seeing. "You've been following us for months. Good thing, too. These boys were planning to take Miss Evelyn back to Kansas, collect their money, and put a bullet in your back for good measure." Jeremiah's expression hardened. "Ain't gonna happen on my watch." Thomas looked up from behind his horse, tears streaming down his soft cheeks. "Please, I'm her brother. I was just trying to help my family. By selling your sister to a man who wanted her dead." Jeremiah's voice held no mercy. "That ain't family, boy. That's just evil." As they bound Thomas and his remaining men, preparing to turn them over to territorial authorities, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Another rider approaching fast. This time, it was Wade Cutter, but not the broken man who'd helped them escape Kansas. This Wade Cutter sat straight in the saddle badge gleaming on his vest, accompanied by 2 federal marshals. "Miss Carraway," he called as he dismounted. "Mr. Two Birds, I have news." "What kind of news?" John asked, rifle still ready. "Judge Hollis is dead." The words hit them like lightning. After all this time, all the running, all the fear, it was over. How Evelyn managed. Federal investigation finally caught up with him. When marshals arrived at his Kansas City office with warrants for his arrest, they found him behind his desk with 3 bullets in his head. Self-inflicted by all appearances. Cutter's smile held grim satisfaction. Coward couldn't face justice, so he took the easy way out. His associates, scattered or dead. The investigation revealed enough crimes to hang a dozen men. Wire fraud, murder, witness, intimidation, corruption, going back 20 years. Cutter looked directly at John. "That includes the lynching of your father. We found records payments to the men involved. William Two Birds was murdered on Judge Hollis's orders because he was getting too close to the truth about stolen tribal lands." John felt something he'd almost forgotten, not just relief, but vindication. His father hadn't died because of random hatred, but because he'd been brave enough to seek justice. There's more, Cutter continued. Congress has passed special legislation recognizing the injustices committed against both of you. All previous warrants are canceled. Captain Eddings has been court-martialed and dismissed from service. You're free, truly free. As the federal marshals took Thomas and his men into custody, preparing to escort them back to face charges, Thomas looked up at his sister one last time. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I was desperate and I made bad choices. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but I'm sorry. Evelyn studied her brother's face, seeing genuine remorse there. I forgive you, Tommy. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. You chose money over family, and that choice has consequences. As the marshals rode away with their prisoners, the 5 people left behind, John, Evelyn, Jeremiah, and his 2 companions stood in the afternoon sun, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. So what now? Jeremiah asked. You folks are free to go anywhere, do anything. World's wide open. John looked at Evelyn, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. They'd built something good in this valley, not just a home, but a life. The horses trusted them, the soil was finally yielding to their care, and they'd learned to live with mountain silence. I think we stay, Evelyn said. This is home now. What about you? John asked Jeremiah. You've got no reason to keep watching over us. Jeremiah laughed, the same rich sound Evelyn remembered from their journey to Dodge City all those months ago. Maybe not. But I like what you folks have built here. Mind if an old freedman and his friends stick around? We know something about farming, and I hear Colorado winters can be hard on folks who don't know the mountains. And so they stayed, all of them. Over the years that followed, their valley became something special. A place where people fleeing persecution could find sanctuary, where mixed families could build lives without fear, where the color of a person's skin mattered less than the content of their character. John taught young men to train horses with patience rather than force. Evelyn started a school teaching children to read and write, regardless of their heritage. Jeremiah and his friends worked the land, coaxing life from soil that had seemed barren. They helped other outcasts find their way to safety, in their valley becoming a way station for those seeking freedom. Word spread quietly through the underground networks that connected the dispossessed. There was a place in Colorado where love mattered more than law, where kindness counted more than color. 10 years after that first terrible morning at the stagecoach wreck, Evelyn stood on her porch watching the sun rise over the peaks. Her hair was silver now, her limp more pronounced, but her eyes still held the fire that had kept her alive in the wreckage. John emerged from the stable older and grayer, but still moving with the fluid grace that had first caught her attention. Behind him came their horses' animals they'd raised from colts, gentle creatures that responded to whispers rather than whips. Any regrets? John asked the question that had become their morning ritual over the years. Evelyn considered it seriously, as she always did. Only that Jeremiah isn't here to see this. Jeremiah had died the previous winter peacefully in his sleep, after helping them save a family of Chinese immigrants from persecution in a nearby mining town. His last words had been about the promise he'd made her keep at the stagecoach wreck. You lived, Miss Evelyn. You really lived. He saw enough, John said, putting his arm around her shoulders. He saw us build something that mattered. In the distance, smoke rose from chimneys throughout their valley. What had started as a single cabin had grown into a small community. Families they'd helped, friends they'd made, people who'd chosen to stay and build something better together. Do you think we kept the promise? Evelyn asked. The one I made to him. John looked around at the life they'd created, the school where children of all colors learned together, the horses that grazed peacefully in morning light, the gardens where vegetables grew in soil that had once seemed barren. Most importantly, he looked at the woman beside him who'd survived everything the world could throw at her and chosen to respond with love rather than hatred. You didn't just live, he said quietly. You lived with such courage and grace that you taught the rest of us how to live too. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace. In the distance, children's laughter echoed from the schoolhouse, where Evelyn would soon begin the day's lessons. Life continuing as it always did, but shaped now by the choices two broken people had made in the wreckage of a stagecoach crash. The Bison Trail, Evelyn murmured, watching the hawk disappear into the morning sky. What about it? That's what this all was, wasn't it? A trail left by something powerful and dangerous that nearly destroyed us. But we followed it anyway, and it led us here. John nodded, understanding. The stampede that had wrecked their old lives had also created the path to their new ones. The trail of destruction had become a trail of hope. As the sun climbed higher, painting their valley in shades of gold and green, they went about the business of living, feeding animals, tending gardens, preparing for another day of teaching and learning and growing. The simple daily miracles that made life worth living. The Bison Trail had led them home. And in finding home, they'd learned the most important lesson the frontier could teach, that love was stronger than hatred, that kindness was more powerful than cruelty, and that the greatest adventures weren't about conquering territories, but about discovering what human beings could accomplish when they chose hope over despair. The promise had been kept. The circle was complete. And two impossible people had proved that impossible things were simply those that hadn't happened yet. Behind them, carved into the wooden beam above their door, were the words that had become their family motto: "You gotta live." They had lived. And in living, they had shown others how to live too.